So good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. This is the third item on today's agenda. I'm Joe Bortoloni, host of this meeting, but panel member David Calusio will be the chair. In addition to the panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you're not speaking. Thank you, David, and please begin the meeting.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Joe, can you please confirm that this session is being recorded?
It is.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
There are not, no.
So at this point, I'll ask if any panel members have any conflict of interest with this submission. Otherwise, I'm going to assume from silence that there is no conflict. The third item on the agenda today is the review of the Bayfront Industrial Area Urban Design Guidelines. The lead planner on the file is Tiffany Singh. Good afternoon, Tiffany. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm. I thought we've got our consultants from Dillon today, and we prepared for both having a maximum of 10 minutes.
That's correct.
Each.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen. And can everyone see that? Yes?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Tiffany Singh, and I'm the planner assigned to the Bayfront Industrial Area Strategy Project. Joining me today is Melissa Kosterman from Dillon Consulting, who's been tasked with assisting the city in developing design guidelines for this unique area. So today I'm going to start off with kind of presenting some brief context about the overall Bayfront Industrial Area strategy. And then Melissa will be providing an overview of the urban design guidelines themselves. So the Bayfront Industrial Area and the strategy project is a 45+ year vision and action plan that seeks to encourage efficient use of land, attract growth and investment, and improve the environmental conditions and the image of the city, the city's largest and oldest employment area. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Hamilton, this is the industrial employment area that you would see if you're going on the QEW and taking the Burlington Bridge. So this project has been around for some time. In 2011, Council approved a capital budget project for the Bayfront Industrial Area secondary plan. However, once the project kind of started, it was realized that they didn't foresee a need for major land use change nor large-scale infrastructure changes. So it didn't really warrant a secondary plan anymore. So as such, they kind of went back to the drawing board on what this could be, and it was determined that instead what was needed was a higher level strategy to attract reinvestment into this employment area and improve the existing land use compatibility issues between sensitive land uses and industrial uses. So in 2015, the city embarked on the Bayfront Industrial Area Strategy, which is a two-phase project. The first phase was a market opportunities kind of work. And then the second phase, which is the one that we're in, is all about visioning and a long-term action plan. And the scope of work also includes a set of urban design guidelines. So just to remind everyone that we are not talking about the entire Lower City waterfront area. We are only referring to the area that is west of, or Wellington Street to the west and Woodward Avenue to the east, north of the railway all the way to the harbor. So these lands are designated employment areas in our Urban Hamilton official plan, and they do not include the intact neighborhoods that are in some of the pockets that you'll see. So there's kind of like red outlining the study area, and you'll see some pockets where there's kind of red outlining a spot that is not part of the study area that is residential and intact neighborhoods. So it's important to note that those neighborhoods that surround our study area cover approximately 19 hectares of land, and that they are well-established low residential. So the study area itself, though, it consists of over 1,600 hectares of mixed industrial lands on the shore of the harbor. And it is considered provincially significant, or it has been named or part of a provincially significant employment zone, and it employs over 14,000 people. It is home to the largest steel cluster in the country, the largest and most active port in the province, and it contains a very unique multimodal transportation network that is also relatively close, in close proximity to the US border. So despite all of these positive attributes, the area has many challenges. So most notable, obviously, are air quality, water quality, the historical intact land uses, and the compatibility issues between the industrial uses and sensitive residential land uses. And even though the area is perceived to have a lot of vacancy, as you can see in this map here, depicted in kind of the green, lime green color, there is actually very little vacancy in the area. So a challenge is really, how do we achieve land use efficiency, requiring kind of an intensification strategy as another top challenge. Another challenge is the need to diversify the local economy here while capitalizing on the steel cluster. And the last main challenge is trying to create synergies and stronger partnerships amongst the existing business community and attracting new business community members as well. So in terms of land use, sorry. So I mentioned before that everything in the study area is considered an employment area, or falls within the employment area designations. The purple in particular refers to industrial land, and the navy blue refers to shipping and navigation. So the industrial land designation applies to older industrial areas of the city containing a variety of industrial uses on a variety of parcel sizes. It includes a full range of manufacturing uses, and supportive industry uses are also permitted. Office uses and some supportive ancillary uses, such as retail, are permitted also, but with limits to scale. The shipping and navigation designation basically recognizes the role of the port, and in particular, the activities that the Hamilton Oshawa Port Authority carry out and their mandate for shipping and navigation. So again, ancillary uses are permitted in those areas too, but with limits to sizing. So in terms of policy direction, unlike some other city-initiated files that you guys may have reviewed, they were coming out of kind of a secondary planning process. And this one is unique because it's kind of a higher level strategy. So as mentioned before, initially there was the idea of doing a secondary plan, and that came from this policy. So it's in Chapter E of Volume 1, basically that the city shall undertake the preparation of a secondary plan or land use strategy for lands or portion thereof in the Bayfront industrial area to establish the limits of a research and development business park, the permitted uses, urban design policies, implementation strategy, and any other transportation or infrastructure related requirements. So what has evolved has not necessarily a secondary plan, but we are still doing the other components through a strategy. Okay, so there's also a policy that speaks to brownfield sites in Chapter B, and it really helped kind of focus the direction and the scope of work for this strategy project. So I'm not going to read it all out, but basically the objective here was to really promote implementing brownfield redevelopment. So I thought it may be helpful to throw in kind of a project process slide to show where we are overall and how the design guidelines kind of fit into all of this. So again, phase 1 was really that market opportunity study, and it was completed in 2015. Phase 2 is the one that we're in right now, and it's kind of got 4 stages. And we're right here at the end with a set of draft guidelines as well as the draft strategy. But I wanted to mention kind of 6 things that came out of the 2015 market opportunity study. So there were 6 recommendations. 1 was to establish a vision for the Bayfront. 2, to ensure that the airport area, the airport employment growth district, that all the greenfield supply came to market soon. Number 3 was to encourage more efficient use of existing land use, existing land and building supply, and to work with landowners in that conversation. And number 4 was to consider targeted site acquisition to gain an element of public control. And number 5 was to establish a program to bring any acquired sites to market. And the last one was to explore program management options, such as the creation of a steering committee. So we are again in this final round, and we're here at DRP kind of presenting to you guys the guidelines, but we do have a strategy document that's in the works internally for review. And then we're hoping to kind of bring everything together for a final round of public consultation soon. So that brings us to the key elements, I guess, of the draft strategy that I think are necessary for you to know before going into the design guidelines. So the main one being kind of the vision. So after a lot of consultation work, we came up with the following vision statement: a modern industrial campus for innovation, clean industry, resilience, and progress. And there is a vision story kind of explaining or exploring that a little bit further. But I'm just going to go straight into the objectives to give Melissa some more time. So then for the objectives, kind of supporting that overall vision, there are 10 of them. The first 3 being maintaining the employment function of the Bayfront, attracting a mix of high quality industrial uses to complement existing industrial strengths, promoting a greater diversity of uses where appropriate, promoting brownfield redevelopment, adaptive reuse, and employment intensification, improving air, soil, and water quality, and improving the attractiveness of both the public and private realm through urban design excellence. And then the last 4, providing opportunities to resolve existing land use compatibility issues, celebrating and strengthening cultural heritage resources, continuing to improve the transportation network for multimodal purposes, and providing opportunities for public access to the waterfront, and enhancing important views and vistas. Okay, so supporting those 10 objectives are 45 draft actions. And instead of going through all of them today, I just wanted to focus on kind of 4 key actions that we see as catalysts for change. And they include establishing leadership and governance. So governance in the sense of like a key steering committee that would help guide an operating model and lead the delivery of several actions. So this group would be identifying kind of a program office for oversight and guidance, leadership that would advance those key actions, and determining kind of like a project budget. And we envision this group to be a mix of various stakeholders, from key tenants in the area, as well as the city and nonprofit organizations and academics. Okay, and then the second one is preparing and developing and implementing a streetscape master plan. So streetscape master plans provide a broad design strategy and context for future physical above ground improvements. And the action here would target kind of 3 key corridors. So we're looking at targeting Burlington Street between Bay and Woodward Avenue, Ottawa Street kind of like in the north-south direction between Barton and Burlington to Industrial Drive, and then the area that's underneath the elevated portion of Nikola Tesla Boulevard. So the successful coordination of movement in those spaces we feel would have the most impact. So that's why we picked those 3 corridors. The third key action is kind of a mirroring of the public side of things, but on the private end. So it's recommended that we do kind of a scoped CIP with a climate change and historic industrial preservation kind of lens applied. And the idea is to target improvements in these aging corridors that serve as a vital connection for movement of goods and people, and mirroring again what improvements could happen on the public side of things, but on the private lands. So the third one is building an internationally recognized architecturally unique flagship building. A modernized architecturally significant building would be a visual expression of change for the area and help to lead in creating that modern industrial campus hub that came out of pretty much all of our consultation discussions with stakeholder groups. So we feel that an architecturally significant building that could house convention space, social spaces, research and innovation, incubation space, recreational uses would be a necessary beacon of change for the area, and that it could have a domino effect to developing more sustainable and better designed buildings, facilities, and structures over time. So those are the 4 key actions that we see as being catalysts for more change. And that brings us to kind of the urban design guidelines themselves. So what we wanted to really emphasize is that these guidelines were really written for the everyday person or a business owner or a land owner in the area. Typically, urban design guidelines have kind of a jargon that is, common knowledge in the planning world, or architects and urban designers, landscape architects, we all understand what the document means, but it is often less tangible for the everyday person. And we really wanted private landowners to take ownership of small things that they could do to improve their own property and see how there can be large impact over time. So we wanted to really emphasize the types of change, and there is a section at the end that's all about quick wins, and it illustrates how those changes can be layered over time, and that it doesn't have to be, just that architecturally beautiful, significant building. Although we want that too, there are smaller changes that can also be made that can have big impact. Okay, so before I let Melissa take over and get into the details of the design guidelines, I wanted to emphasize a few points that really were kind of inputs that we considered when developing the overall strategy as well as the urban design guidelines. So the entire study area is generally considered a brownfield site. Legacy traditional industrial uses are directly adjacent to intact residential neighborhoods. There is quite a variety of streets and lot fabric, creating both an urban and suburban context. And then there is a wide variety in terms of built form. So we've got a variety of building heights, scale of building size, setbacks from the street, landscaping, and the parking design and access for both parking and loading. So with that, there's also a variety of road networks and grid connectivity. This inconsistency has led to kind of impacting different types of users on the road and really favoring truck activity primarily. The area has also a high need for efficient goods movement. So we do need to keep in mind that at the end of the day, those trucks are there for the businesses, and we need to ensure that we have safety in mind for all users, but also efficient goods movement. And then Hamilton just wants to be Hamilton. So this area is very rich with history and pride in the legacy of the steel and manufacturing industry in this area. All the stakeholders that we met with acknowledge the need for a variety of improvements, but there is no appetite for the type of changes that are seen in kind of the Toronto, Portland's kind of atmosphere. There is a very distinct community in Hamilton and in this area, and they are very proud of everything that makes up this the neighborhoods and this study area. So we needed to keep in mind that the change needs to speak to the community and not just what works well in other places. So now I'm going to pass it over to Melissa, and we'll end off with kind of what the next steps are and then the questions that we had already submitted to you earlier. Okay, Melissa?
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you all for allowing us to speak today on the Bayfront Industrial Area Renewal Strategy Urban Design Guidelines. My name is Melissa Kosterman, and I'm an urban designer with Dillon Consulting. Next slide. So the Bayfront today is currently, it's a very dynamic, it's a very lively, industrious place, mainly focused on goods movement, generation of steel and things of that nature. The environment is primarily focused on vehicular and a lot of truck movement, as well as road and rail access. One thing that we did note was that a lot of the area could benefit from streetscape improvements and improvements to the active transportation and public realm, but we'll get more into that. Next slide. So the first step that we took on this journey was to look at the different areas within the Bayfront. It is a very large, complex area. So the first thing we did was to propose general character areas to see what exactly comprises the Bayfront. And the next slide will show those areas as we had them delineated. The first and largest area is the traditional industrial. That's your steel industries and the larger manufacturing. And this will most likely not change because it is very successful and will continue to be so. The next area is the working waterfront, a very active and very lively port with waterfront access, uses, shipping, and navigation. The next is light and support, and this is a tiering down from the heavy industrial area, and this includes lighter industrial uses, smaller facilities, and supporting industries. And then moving further, as you get into the more established, more residential heavy part of the city, is the transitional zones, and this is where we see an even less intense industrial use, as well as an increase in those more supportive uses that can benefit both the industry as well as the neighboring residential areas. Once we had the character areas in place, we also looked to urban design principles to help guide the overall document themselves. And these principles were not pulled out of the air. They are based in the city's existing citywide principles for urban design. So the first three are very high level. They go into subsections, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but the first are pertaining to overall principles, meaning that there should be the urban design in the Bayfront should foster a sense of city pride and identity. Development and redevelopment should create spaces that connect rather than disconnect the public and private realms. And the urban design should enhance and support community health and well-being. Next slide. The next three pertain to public realm and private realm, respectively. So for the public realm, places should be flexible and able to adapt to future changes. As we know, environments change all the time. And streets shall be designed as important public spaces. Streets are not just for cars and not just for vehicles anymore. Streets, where appropriate, should be for all, and that should be looked at safely. And then in terms of private realm, the redevelopment should enhance the character of the existing environment. And another layer on top of those principles is the fact that we were starting to incorporate sustainable design standards. And these are peppered throughout the document. and they look specifically at landscape elements, building and siting, and circulation. The next section of the board report is the general design guidelines, and these really can be reflected in both the public and private realm. And without going into all of them in detail, they pertain to general site organization, built form, materials, landscaping, design of roads, parking, and interior circulation, sustainable design, lighting, and safety, signage, and fencing and screening. And the public realm guidelines apply to all the municipally owned and publicly accessible spaces, including sidewalks, trails, streetscapes, parks, open spaces. And two aspects of that really focus on the greening and public access to the waterfront are two of the elements that were within those guidelines. The public realm and open space specific guidelines, we've broken out into a number of elements. And without reading them out, I'm going to follow up with each of the following slides touch on these. So I'll just go to the next. So gateways, minor and major gateways have been identified. Major meaning higher level design, more architectural features, lighting, and these are located at major entry points into the area. And the minor ones denote an arrival, but they are more subtle and incorporated into the streetscape. Wayfinding has been discussed and proposed, and it's really meant to help orient visitors, commuters, cyclists, pedestrians throughout the publicly accessible portions of the Bayfront. The views and vistas, even though this is an industrial area, there are quite some striking and prominent views, and those include those to the water, those to the escarpment, and actually those which include the iconic overhead infrastructural elements that make the Bayfront unique. And there are different levels of maintain, enhance, and protect, and we've identified those in the report. So streetscapes are one of the easier things to implement to really make a visual change. There are two levels of intensity related to the streetscaping, and one is the major, which is major streetscaping, which includes a variety of different interventions, and that's really focused in on the major connector, east-west connector. And then there's potential minor streetscaping identified, which have those feeder streets. And I'll just cycle through these as I don't want to take up too much time. So we have an at-grade industrial road condition. There's an elevated industrial road condition where there's an opportunity for structural aesthetics, which I will talk about briefly in a bit. Connector streets, which connect the residences to other parts of the city. And neighborhood, which is really the more local streets, which is within the neighborhoods and in and around. And the Bayfront is unique in the sense that there are two neighborhood conditions where there's a residential only and then a mixed, because there are established residential uses within the Bayfront, but they just happen to be adjacent to industry. Road safety and paving look at the need for appropriate signage, crossings, visibility, barrier-free, clear definitions, and the need for durable and resilient materials and continuous maintenance, because the heavy uses within this area do require maintenance over time.
How much more do you have, Melissa? Because we are definitely running over the combined time of the two of you.
I can go through briefly. I was timing myself, but in terms of, I could just go through these briefly. We've talked about parks and open spaces and structural aesthetics, meaning that they're applied to the structures, public art. And then we get into the private realm guidelines, and the important thing to note for these is that they are not pertaining to land use. They are pertaining to specific uses which are happening on a site, which may be more than one on a site. And we have prestige industrial, general industrial, warehousing and logistics, office supporting commercial and retail, and arterial related commercial. And the way that we've chosen to, and sorry, this chart just denotes where they happen and where they're more appropriately located. And then we get into the guidelines themselves, and we've chosen to use a 3D axle model. And for each of these, we've denoted key directions and the guidelines they pertain to. And these are all in the report as well, which you have a copy of. And I just have a couple more, and they're just the quick wins to really show how minor interventions can go a long way to really brighten up a space. The first is the streetscape, very stark, and these were prepared by the city, these befores and afters. This is another location with that iconic overhead infrastructure. And then the last is just like a lighter industrial use. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back to Tiffany to close it out.
Tiffany, I think you're on mute.
So just our next steps are after this DRP meeting to take into consideration everything that you provide us with comment-wise, and then go out for our final round of consultation, and then hopefully bring this forward to GIC and council in early Q1 of next year. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn it over to, I guess, is Eldon back yet, or are we, is it Jennifer Mallard, I guess, would be the first one for questions.
I don't see Eldon here. I can step in. Thank you for your presentation. And I'm going to try to limit this to questions because comments will come up later. So the urban design guidelines, we understand, is an appendix to the material that Tiffany presented earlier, correct?
Correct.
So they really should go hand in hand. That's good to know. And then how much of this is binding, and how does it get implemented? So the streetscape recommendations, I guess, are a guideline for city funded and initiated civic improvements. But then the particular site guidelines would be implemented as ownership changes over or lands are redeveloped by new owners and going through planning approvals. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. And the streetscape I didn't mention because I was a little bit rushed, but the streetscape, the corridor typologies are in line with the city's complete streets manual, which so we've reflected that, and we've taken that into consideration when we were building those guidelines. And as part of, there's a lot of work that went into the strategy, which may not have come up because, again, that is a whole other ballgame strategy, but there are a number of actions, and some of them are incentives for existing owners to make these interventions to their existing properties. And there's programs and things of that nature within the strategy which would really entice those owners to make these interventions. Okay. So it does go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you. I'll save the rest for the comment section.
Jennifer Size.
Thanks. So thanks, Tiffany and Melissa, for your presentations. I guess I'm going to build on that question about implementation. For the quick wins, I was wondering if you have kind of a timeline in place or are intending to commit council to pursuing some or even all of those initiatives in the near term?
For the quick wins in particular, the images.
Yeah.
So that was just to kind of entice private landowners of what kind of changes they could make to their own property. So the quick wins were really just representing what change could occur. It's not necessarily a piece for implementing by the city.
Thanks. That's all my questions.
Yana?
Thank you. I don't have any questions at this time. Thanks.
Oda.
Oh, sorry, my video is off. Hi. It's coming. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the shoreline and if the design or the treatment of the shoreline could be the part of this guideline or not.
That's a really great question. So part of those, recommendations that were mentioned briefly in my part was about acquisition of land, and that isn't something that's been done yet. It is part of the strategy and action plan to pursue. But ultimately, at this point, the city owns very little land in this study area. And that's like the biggest difference between other industrial cities that have been trying to make big changes, like Toronto's Portlands, for example, where Waterfront Toronto owns such a large amount of land out there. So that's the really big difference here. And that's why we really targeted the audience in which this document is speaking to, because we need private landowners to really want to take ownership.
And one of the issues is some of these uses that are along the waterfront, it's really very difficult and almost, I don't want to say impossible, to allow public access because of the safety, because of security, those types of issues. So there, I mean, we have identified certain areas. I think it's been so long. One of the buildings has actually constructed. I think it's on a private, or it's the Port Authority, but has like
it's the Port Authority.
So,
yes,
Port
the Port Authority.
So you can climb a lookout, so you can see the working waterfront, which is very interesting. And different other interventions such as that have been kind of potentially outlined, not proposed, but added as a potential in these guidelines, like potential improvements to say. I think Windermere Park is the one, because that is a city-owned park and it's right on the edge, and having such a structure could allow for another kind of visual access point without getting physical access, because that is really lacking along this shoreline because of, again, that heavy use nature and the issues of safety and security.
And also the viewpoints that you have suggested in the guideline, those are the points that could be accessible for the public.
There was a map that I didn't highlight, but it does have those potential points. The views I had were more for the actual views and vistas to either protect, maintain, or enhance. But we do in the document outline where that potential visual/physical access could occur. But a lot of it, it was limited.
Okay, good, thank you.
I don't have many questions. I guess one is if there is any intention to have a master plan of this area that has a more of a definitive idea of where the ideal land development might be, and the extension of a street network, or how this might actually be executed beyond some of the just principles for somebody developing their own property, what the bigger 45-year vision is, I guess.
Yeah, that's another great question. So ultimately, it comes down to ownership of land again, and we are limited currently, but should there be an opportunity to acquire more properties that we could then have a larger role in dictating what happens, then that could progress into a master planning exercise. The other avenue would be if one of the larger tenants that we envision being part of this kind of steering committee, that governance group, if there was some kind of partnership amongst these large tenants and the land that they own in trying to create this larger campus with their properties in mind, and then working on that kind of master plan vision with those partners all at the table. So that's the goal, and we don't know what geographically that could look like at this point, but that would definitely be something that could happen in the medium to long-term range of time.
I don't think we have any more questions, so I'm gonna look to, I guess, Jennifer Mallard for comments.
Sure. Full disclosure, I'm a third generation Hamiltonian, and my great grandparents came to Hamilton in 1906. And so, Tiffany, I really appreciated your comments about what this site is. It's huge. It's huge for Hamilton. It's huge for the country. It's huge for North America in what its significance is. And that the pride that Hamiltonians have over what this is, it's been their livelihood for generations, because it, you know, drives what Hamilton is. And so that passion I don't see in the design guidelines. I see it in the first document, but I don't see it translated. So in terms of recognition of heritage, even, you know, signage guidelines, even materiality, you know, all of that significance should be reflected in the design guidelines that I feel are just too generic, that they don't apply to this like super significant piece of Canadian history. So I think there has to be some chapter on heritage recognition, and I, you know, the traditional language of heritage recognition being about brick and porticos and you know, protection of site angles to water, all of that, yes, but protection to site angles to the smokestacks, like there has to be an appreciation for the grittiness of this, which is fantabulous, right? Like it's pretty amazing. So I think we kind of need to turn the traditional recognition of a character neighborhood on its head a little bit to appreciate what this is. And it comes down to even appreciation of materials, like in the specific guidelines where it says that you know, buildings should be quality materials. They shouldn't be concrete block. They should be glass and maybe stucco or masonry. I would say take the stucco out of that. What about Corten steel, or what about concrete, or what about concrete block? Because some of the best industrial buildings are really authentic to the industry that houses them, and there's some fabulous design examples of that you could put in your report of industrial buildings that are built of Corten steel or something. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity to capitalize on the manufacturing process. So I think because this is a huge area, and because I think the opportunities are pretty unique for this kind of plan, and the report should reflect that uniqueness. I'll stop here. I could go on for longer, but my colleagues have to have time to say things too.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. So I guess overall, I really did appreciate your high-level vision and objectives you've set for the urban design guidelines to promote the high-quality design as this really important area develops and redevelop. I appreciate your commitment to greening and connection to the waterfront, which I think are key elements. I would like to see more of an explanation behind some of the guidelines. Some of them already contain this, but it's really important to understand the goal in each case in order to implement really good design guidelines. As an example, guidelines for heights. Why is that particular height desirable? Is it in the relationship to the street or the public realm? Is it neighboring buildings? I really think that guidelines are meant to be bent sometimes in order to make room for good or even innovative design. And having that solid understanding of the reasons behind the design guidelines is what's going to help implement them better in the future. They also allude a couple times in the urban design guidelines to the character of the area throughout. But the section on character areas under 2.4, I found to speak more to current uses instead of what it's actually providing the character in those areas. So, for example, is there a consistency in the building massing or the materials or the architectural styles that set those character areas apart from each other? Is there something that unites them that could be celebrated, like the steel and manufacturing history of the area and the overhead architecture that we've touched on, or that you've touched on in your presentations, which I really liked to see that. I think this section would benefit from a bit more analysis on what's unique to each of these distinct character areas and what features are encouraged to continue being developed. I had two very specific suggestions just for your consideration. Under 3.3, your sustainability design standards, I'd consider including other green building certificates rather than just LEED. Things like Green Globe and Passive House come to mind. And under 4.4, the landscape design, the plant list I found to be a little bit limited. I think they could contribute to a lack of biodiversity if we're limited in this entire area to only plant, these 8 trees. That could be an issue, especially if one becomes susceptible in the future to new pests and diseases. So I'd suggest increasing your potential species list, making sure
that was actually
Sorry,
that was actually driven from our public works group, like forestry, and the list that they use and what was considered hardy species, just because it is so hard to grow things in this area of the city. But I appreciate the comments, and we'll figure out a better way to word that section.
You're very limited for time, so I suggest you just let the panelists talk. There'll be opportunity at the end for
Sorry.
Thanks.
commentary.
I did note that, and I appreciate you adding that. It's something that I do see a lot of, but would appreciate opening that up a little bit, at least for the future, as those lists may be updated too. Noting we're short on time, I just want to say I am overall really glad to see the urban design guidelines come forward for such an important area. And I really look forward to seeing the final version of them. So thank you.
Jana.
Thank you. I will take some time though. I'm sorry, but I think it's very important for this one. I very much agree with Jennifer. The vision for this very special site is still missing from the guidelines. I would like to say that it's difficult to review the guidelines, which are supposed to accompany another document without actually seeing the parental document and understand it well ahead of time. So I think that's what we were probably missing. So maybe that's why our commentaries, well, maybe a little harsh. I should probably also say that I love this area and I think it's very special and gritty, and some of the structures are really, really beautiful. I believe that such a large area really needs some structural decisions made first to build on some layers. The potential of future blocks and streets and connections, they should be envisioned before you start preparing design concepts and consequently the design guidelines. And that's why I was asking if the Bayfront strategy could be forwarded to us because I hope that we would find more concrete information on the overall vision for the area. It doesn't need to be a full secondary plan, just a higher level master plan, which of course should be done with all the partners at the table. So to me, the document so far is very much missing this larger picture, and I think it's a bit premature. To me, it mostly right now reads as a collection of various guidelines in various categories without thoughtfully addressing the vision and the actions described by Tiffany earlier. And that I understand it's a draft, so I'm sure that the final document will read very differently. And just for a few examples, I'll focus mostly on the building design because that's what I think was concerning for me. You have general guidelines, which are 4. Then the private realm guidelines, to me, not really clear. Why are you distinguishing public from private when you likely want to achieve the exact same excellence, not based on ownership? Also, this way, as you structure the document, it has so many guidelines repeated in those different categories, and sometimes they're lost. And I think it would read better, and you could do much more if you focus on the structure of the document. For example, prestige industrial is supposed to be of a higher standard, but has only 4 guidelines regarding build form. Then in general industrial, again, 3 guidelines, but they go to much more specific examples, like a minimum of 80% glazing, for example, along building frontage. That's a lot for this typology. Actually, might not be even, might be too much for any typology from environmental point of view. And again, would be maybe reasonable to prescribe glazing in prestige industrial and office. So there are these little discrepancies, like generally you require screening of the mechanical, but not in prestige. So I understand that it would be probably, you would want it in all typologies. So again, this could be included in the very first general building design category and will be more clear. And generally, the building design gets very limited guidelines. So compared to other categories, and I think it could go farther. And as Jennifer mentioned, there are often references to materials as glazing and stucco and masonry, and metal and steel so common for industrial buildings, not mentioned. Concrete is actually discouraged or not desirable at all in many of the typologies, even though architectural concrete is often beautiful and probably much more reasonable than stucco for this type of buildings. So, and Jennifer mentioned this already, you have some specific guidelines regarding heights. I didn't understand that at all. For example, for warehouses, you are very specific. You are saying they shall be 4 stories. I don't understand, because maybe this is very specific for this area, but I assume that this is very limiting. So to me, there is limited information on building design, variety, articulation, or any innovative approach. I left some of the suggestions, particularly for public realm, streetscaping, and open space. Some of them were really great, but the innovative approach for buildings is really missing. I was surprised about the suggested fencing and screening, metal fences and walls only. Maybe more focus should be to screen some areas by the side design. And others likely cannot be screened, and some industrial buildings feature outdoor equipment, which looks great and beautiful and, you know, belongs to this. So maybe does create the character and doesn't need to be screened at all. Anyway, just a thought like the tall metal wall screening might not always be the best solution. And maybe we should find ways how to encourage more creative solutions. Landscaping also suggested as screening. That could be very unpredictable, in my opinion, especially in areas where there is a concern for challenging growing conditions like this one. And other thing I wanted to mention, I love the illustration photos. Many of them are really great. I would strongly suggest to adding even more, but I would eliminate all of the 3Ds. They're very simplistic, showing somewhat ordinary schemes with lots of parking, are lacking any innovative approach, and more importantly, there are often missing features which are discussed in the guidelines, like relationship with the public realm, strong entrances with connections to sidewalks. Some of those 3Ds are missing that. So I don't think these graphics help the document. And just as a last thought, as Jennifer was mentioning, there is a strong emphasis on LEED, even though it's like there are many other grading systems, and it is also recognized that LEED will likely not be often achieved by industrial developments. So maybe rather than focusing on a rating system, maybe it would be better for the city to develop their own standards and require those with a strong focus on innovation. There are some parameters that are already suggested, such as 50% of green roofs, for example, and there were some others. So maybe it would be better to focus on those, especially with this very local and specific context. Something like Toronto's green checklist or something like that could be helpful. So I think overall, I really think that the document will be great. It has a strong potential, just needs to be thought through a little more. Thank you.
Hoda.
Thank you for the presentation and also for the document. It looks great and it has covered a lot. Lots of details about landscaping and streetscape that I appreciate. So I echo my colleagues' comments about the heritage part to be included in master planning. Other than that, I still think that it's needed to have a part to create a category of different water shoreline treatments possible, the parts that is accessible by public and the parts that are more private or along the industrial area that could be just visible to the public from other points. And also the other thing is about active design and bike pathways. The things that, recommending that having the separate bike pathway in the streetscape design, that's good, but I think it's not enough. The most important thing about the bike pathway is the connectivity that I'm not sure if this in this document could be included, but be suggested the possible whole pathway or the circulation in this site and the connectivity of that with the other bike pathways in the city. That could be helpful. That's my comments. Thank you again.
Thank you. I guess I agree with my colleagues that the vision and the ambition of this exercise is great. I think that it's definitely something the city should continue to pursue. I think that there is a need for something a little more specific and less generic and boilerplate in terms of the actual guideline. I think that there's a lost opportunity, as Jennifer and Jana have described, in terms of something that is driven specifically by the particular uses that are on the site. I think that there is I just think there's a misunderstanding of what is really realistic here and where the real potential is. I think that the heavy industry has, which is the heart of this zone, isn't really somehow recognized in the standards and the guidelines that in some ways it is unique in a city to have such heavy industry right on the port and still be in the heart of a city like this. And yet there's an ambition to maintain it clearly. And so those kind of industries are in conflict with a lot of the other aspects. And yet the description of, I think it's too casually described, this idea that you're going to have active, as Hoda's saying, active transport in road systems that are taking heavy trucks and stuff like this. I think that the character of the heritage that Jennifer Mallard was referring to doesn't seem to be recognized, and that in some ways it would seem to me that the zoning for those or the urban design approach should be much more laissez-faire, actually, about how the industrial activities would occur, and that you are going to attract heavy industry and maintain heavy industry because you understand it. You're not trying to pretty it up with kind of gingerbread stuff. It's like, it's raw, it's real, and we're going to let it happen. And then how do you, and celebrate it in a way. And in some ways, I feel that you're kind of doing little graphics on it and trying to make it pretend that it's like a Walt Disney set or something. And so I think you could be much more strong about it and recognize, and I think that the spirit of it is, if you engage with these land users, which are obviously fundamental to any progress on this area, I think that that's key. And I also think that engaging with them and getting some kind of master plan that they're part of will help re-steer this in a way that becomes a realistic, footprint or trail forward for 45 years. How are these industries going to evolve over time? Where do they see their own activities going? And therefore, what level of engagement with the community or the public that would be allowed on those large parts of land? Is it just going to continue to be such a, really unfriendly environment? And if so, then, you making a decision to maintain it and keep this industry here, you kind of got to accept what comes with it. Or maybe they will have a vision for how, the steel industry is really, transforming. I mean, they're talking about zero carbon steel in Europe. And so maybe there is a process where you're not going to get these huge coke ovens and whatnot. But even if you're attracting new industry, I think that the nature of it is it shouldn't be screen the mechanical stuff and screen the industrial process and hide it. You should say, you come to our industrial park, we're not going to burden you with that kind of stuff. We're going to want you to actually celebrate whatever it is that's unique in industrial production and put it on display, just like the existing steel stuff is. I think that there are other aspects of it that I think, and this is all to me about specificity. I think you've got a unique circumstance here. And I think if you dig into the specificity of that, then, some unique attitudes and responses to these different conditions will arise. I mean, this idea about the conflict between truck and active transportation, I think, therefore, to me, you have to come up with a system. How are you going to achieve active transportation? And I think it's going to be an independent parallel system. You talk about connections to some of these other existing bike trails or trails that are in the periphery, and yet they don't show up in the documents, and you don't show any method for how that might actually, that connectivity might be achieved. And I think you actually have to, I think, make a proposal through some kind of master plan to show what you're talking about, so your other stakeholders can start to understand what you're saying. Because I don't think that comes through. I think that the buffer issue, I mean, you identified these zones and there are buffers for some of the residential areas, but there is no solution to the areas where the heavy industry zone slams right up against areas that are presently, residential. So I think that vision should include, okay, we're going to somehow expand those transition and buffer zones in order to finally accommodate this conflict or create a more, so the heavy industry continue to be whatever it is. And I mean, given that you're talking 45 years, I mean, maybe many of these ambitions may seem completely impractical right now, but I think that those are some of the major issues, and that should be what you're, I think these are, I can, you got a real conundrum here because the main players are, as you say, there's no public property, but I think these are the kind of things that you have to embrace in challenging this thing. I think that the sustainability guidelines I found almost like confusing, as Yana said. They're just everywhere. I think that some of them look like they're just cut and paste a bit too much because they do. I don't know why the percentages, even in some of them, why you wouldn't restrict some, like some of them. I would re-examine, I guess, all of the percentages and decide, like, what are you really trying to achieve here, and probably simplify that down to just one section that just clearly articulates your sustainability ambitions, not to just regurgitate the lead documents in your document, but rather extract it and just give a list of what the appropriate ones are here. What else do I have here? Okay, some of the street typologies, there is discussion about active transport, but I don't see it in the sections. The section for the road system underneath the raised roadway doesn't actually match the section. There's a road under the road, like you've got a double-decker condition there, and the section just shows like there's no road underneath it. And I don't think that's, I mean, there might be a few conditions there, but I think the principal condition is essentially a road under a raised road. And so I think, and I don't know how you solve that and make that, appealing or whatever, but I think that I think you got to tackle that as that's identified as one of your major routes, right? That's the big primary route within the document, and I'm the one that I'm looking at that is addressing it doesn't seem to actually reflect the conditions. So I think there's a little bit more depth again about specificity, and I have to admit I'm not sure how the vision of this clean industry and the gentrification, given that footprint of these heavy industry in the middle of it. I think that even that vision statement, I think you need to sit down with your major stakeholders there and get them to buy into it as well, or help bring some reality to it, at least in the maybe it is a 45-year thing. And I think we all have to embrace these kind of ambitions, but I think in this case there's such a key player that I think the next stage is going to be the interesting one. And I when you get this steering committee going, it's going to be fascinating to see how far and how willing they are to go there. And in some ways I feel that some of the rules that you've set up, I think they kind of interfere with a more fulsome conversation of the possibilities that integrate, engaging with them might have. So anyway, I don't know if you have any questions, but that's we're kind of over our time. So
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I wish I could have provided more context. I know that it was requested yesterday to provide a draft strategy document. Unfortunately, we're still in internal review, so I didn't feel comfortable with sending it out because it essentially becomes public at this point. So until every department has reviewed it internally, I just didn't feel comfortable with sending it out, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll be able
in the
to
absence
transfer.
of that document, hopefully our
Yes.
comments are useful.
Yes, definitely. Because at the end of the day, this document, the design guidelines, will still be a standalone piece. The request is to essentially have this implemented, and then I'm not sure if you know, but the city is working on citywide design guidelines, and this would be like an appendix within there. So all the specific urban design guidelines that exist across the city through various secondary plans, although this is not a secondary plan, this would also be in that appendix. So it wouldn't necessarily be viewed with the strategy in all cases. So hopefully somebody would see, oh, it's part of that strategy, maybe I should read that document. But really, those key pieces that you failed to understand from your review of just the design guidelines, clearly we need to make sure that there's repetition in the document so that it's understood as a standalone. So yeah, we really appreciate all of the comments. The master planning one in particular, that is a big piece, and the stakeholders that we have had involved in the process so far, there is appetite for this campus, this hub. However, the details, again, geographically, how that would look is very unknown at this point. But we do have the large tenants from Stelco and AMD and the Port Authority all involved. And we know what kind of direction everybody is on the same page for going. But again, what that can look like and how that master plan would evolve it's just, we're too high level at this point. But you bring up some good points. Would the design guidelines be limiting if we have that master planning exercise coming after? So yeah, lots to discuss.
I think they need to inform each other, and so yeah, won't repeat what I've already said. So hopefully this is useful.
Very.
I guess I do think it's excellent that the city is doing this. I would say for sure this is a big opportunity, and recognizing that it's not just a liability from a city point of view, but it's an asset, and how to optimize it and make it, continue to have it how do you integrate it, that kind of a use into the city is a real challenge. And it's great that Hamilton's going right at it, I guess, in this particular circumstance. Thank you for your presentation and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.